Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a second. So if you can grab a seat, that would be wonderful. Now, if only I can get every other room to listen like that. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. We really are grateful that you have joined us for our Meeting the Moment program on the impacts of the federal funding freeze. I have to say, this really is an incredible turnout, both in the room, so thank you all for being here in person, and we are doing a live stream. So to those of you out in the virtual world, thank you for joining us. Since 1802, I'm always still struck by that date, but since 1802, the Philadelphia Bar Association has upheld the values of protecting the rule of law and defending our democracy. And we will continue to do so. As we move through 2025, we are finding the power of our voice to stay true to our mission, to serve the profession and the public by promoting justice, professional excellence, and respect for the rule of law. We are doing this by trying to create opportunities exactly like this one for lawyers, the legal profession, and the public to work together to meet this moment in service to our democracy. It is critical at this time when our justice system is being challenged, as well as our lawyers are being attacked, that we all join together to protect the rule of law and access to justice. In doing so, we will support the mission of the Philadelphia Bar Association and the values of lawyers and the legal profession by fostering the understanding of, involvement in, and equal, unabridged access to justice. My name is Kathy Jafari, and I have the privilege of being the chancellor of the Philadelphia Bar Association. We've come up with 3 ways that you can learn what our association is doing at this time. First, to be the convener, to have opportunities where we can all gather and have conversations. One of our greatest strengths is that it encompasses legal professionals from across the city, including different practice areas, law firms, and experience levels. So we value the contribution and viewpoints of every one of our members and what they bring to the table. We are committed to creating those tables where we can have conversations. Second, we are the communicator. We make our voices heard through resolutions, statements, and amicus briefs. We have spoken out on numerous occasions this year, including in the defense of the rule of law and the independence of the legal profession. We've also created a page on our website where we aggregate all the Know Your Law documents, so please make sure you check out the information that we have. And finally, we are the collaborators. We will collaborate with different partners in disseminating useful information, promoting opportunities to engage in volunteer and pro bono work, or to donate financially to support that work. So with that, welcome to our second in the series of Meeting the Moment in 2025. This one is focused on the federal funding freeze. We have 2 great panels for you to hear from, one on how the federal funding impacts the nonprofit community, and the second on the perspectives from the philanthropic community. But before we hear from our panelists, I am so grateful for our speaker who will be having a fireside chat with me. Welcome, Jen Selber. Jen Selber is the General Counsel of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we are so lucky to have you here today to speak with us on this topic. I'd like to thank the organizers for today, including everyone at the Bar Association, our Executive Director, Harvey Hurdle, as well as Rachel Kipp, Head of Marketing, as well as Ali Hooven. I'd also like to welcome our Chancellor-elect in the room, Ezra Wergelanter. And I'd also like to thank Brian Kizawaleski, Lisa Swaminathan, Amal Bass, Debbie Gross, Morgan Cheshire, Karen Lyman, and Vic Patel. Finally, I'd like to thank all of the speakers, and you'll meet them shortly, so I'm not going to go through the whole list. But before we get there, please welcome Jen to the stage. And as she makes her way up here, let me share with you that Jen was appointed General Counsel by the Governor, Josh Shapiro, effective January 17, 2023. As General Counsel, Jen serves as a close advisor to the Governor and his senior leadership team. In leading the Office of General Counsel, Jen oversees the legal review and approval of a myriad of executive orders, each serving as a bedrock for numerous policy objectives championed by the governor. Jen leads a staff of nearly 1,000 employees, including almost 600 attorneys. So please welcome Jen to the stage. So let's get started with the conversation. I think we have to turn these on. Let me just see. I think that should do it. Yeah, there we go. So Jen, really, I want to say thank you for taking the time, coming to Philly and taking the time and sitting with us to just share with us a conversation about this topic. And first, I would really love the audience to hear about, I gave a little bit of where you are today,
Right.
but would you share with the audience about how you got there?
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the invitation to be here. I spent most of my career as a prosecutor. I got out of law school. I worked for 1 year at Morgan Lewis as a litigation associate. I clerked in the Eastern District for Anita Brody, and then went to the DA's office. And I was there for about 18 years. Went through all of the different units there, and spent a good deal of time in the homicide unit where I was a line prosecutor. And then eventually I became a supervisor, and I was the chief of the homicide unit for about 7 years, which was really a wonderful experience, all 18 years. And then I was asked to run the criminal division of the Attorney General's office by the new Attorney General, who's now our governor, Josh Shapiro.
Got it. Okay.
Who I had not met and didn't know.
Oh.
And it was a pretty overwhelming assignment because the job was in Harrisburg. I'm from Philadelphia. I have 3 kids. I still live in Philadelphia. And I was really a homicide expert, and the realm of the Attorney General's office is very broad.
Mhm.
And it was all criminal cases, 4 statewide investigating grand juries, supervising about 500 people, and 300 of them were criminal agents, which I'd never supervised agents
So
before.
all
So it was very
brand new.
interesting. Yeah. It was really interesting to see. And I also, instead of just supervising that group, really got to interact with the higher levels of the AG's office, just meaning like the communications and media team, the policy folks, the budget folks. I just got exposed to a lot of other things that I didn't get to do with
The
DA's
support
office.
team, the non-lawyers.
The non-lawyers, right. So I did that for 6 years. And then the Attorney General was elected governor, and he asked me to be his general counsel, to which I said, why would you want me to do that?
Did you really say that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I really said that because it's just a vast job. And actually, I think most of the general counsel have been from large law firms where they've at least had some exposure to a broad array of civil law. Although now that I'm in the job, I will say there is no job that could possibly prepare anybody for the amount of work that there is, and just the scope.
Mhm.
But I rely on the 550 or 600 lawyers that are there, the general counsel, all of the lawyers in all of the 32 executive agencies report up through the general counsel. So there are lawyers that are experts in every area. Every area imaginable.
Okay.
But I had to get used to, instead of being an expert in my field, which I had been for many years, I am always the person that knows the least.
Oh, wow.
Because all of my lawyers know more than I do about whatever it is that they're talking to me about. So it was a really interesting evolution. It's very, very challenging. and fascinating. So that's how I
Well,
got there.
we are grateful that you were there. And now let's get actually into the meat of why we're here today. When you and I were speaking, what I was hoping that the audience could get an opportunity to understand is, could you just give us an overarching picture of actually how funding works between the federal government and the Commonwealth? What does the Commonwealth, for example, rely on?
Yeah. So the state of Pennsylvania, and this is true for almost all states, relies very heavily on federal funding. To give you an idea, for our upcoming budget 2025-2026, it's about $53 billion of our budget is federal. And that makes up about 40% of all of the programming that the state does. So it's an enormous chunk.
Okay.
And that money, just to give you an idea of generally where that money is going, the largest part of it goes for medical assistance.
Oh,
So that means it's going into our Department of Human Services,
okay.
and then getting pushed out in Pennsylvania in our 67 counties. Almost every county has between 10 and 20% of its population on Medicaid.
Okay.
At Philadelphia, it's 42%. So MA does a lot to really support people all across Pennsylvania. So that's the biggest bulk of the funding. And then there's other funding of programs you've heard about, to the tune of about $7 billion, which is like CHIP and SNAP. So, food insecurity, very, very basic and important services to low-income people across Pennsylvania.
And my guess is most people know, but I always like to describe it. Can you tell us what SNAP and CHIP is really quickly?
So I don't know that much about CHIP, but SNAP is literally a food assistance program. We have lots of food assistance programs in Pennsylvania, but SNAP is the one that is almost totally funded by the Fed. So you have to, you have to have a certain income requirement, but it is truly for food insecurity. So it is pushing meals out to folks that need it.
Really helpful.
We get about $5 billion that goes to the Department of Education, and that is for mostly special education needs. Also Title I, which is low income, and also food support in the schools, breakfasts, snacks for kids that are going hungry. Yeah, supplemental lunch, exactly.
Okay.
And then Department of DEP and PennDOT each get about 3 to 4 billion. PennDOT, just think of all the infrastructure.
Transportation.
Yeah, transportation, roads, bridges.
Okay.
They get a lot of what we'll talk about a little bit later, which is the infrastructure money that was passed under President Biden.
Okay.
So that went across all states, hundreds of billions of dollars to support infrastructure projects. And then for DEP, it's also infrastructure, but also lots of community projects to keep your water safe or to fill orphan wells, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later. And then finally, some federal money, about $2 billion, goes to our Department of Commerce and DCED, Commerce and Economic Development, for certain projects that are supported by the Fed. So that's it. We also have almost 8,000 employees that work for the state that are either partially or fully funded by the federal government.
Oh, are those employees connected with some of the programming or?
Yeah, like they might be in our Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. They
Mhm.
might be in DHS. Most of the big agencies at least have a couple that are either through a grant funded or something else, are getting some federal money for their salaries.
Okay.
So it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And you actually described for us almost exactly how the funding gets kind of allocated across the state. So, while we were preparing for today, we spoke about at the time what was happening when the executive orders were generally being issued.
Yeah.
And, clearly we're here to talk about the federal funding freeze executive order. But can you also give a sense to the audience about, what was the state of affairs and kind of walk us through the timeline a little bit about what was happening? Maybe give us a glimpse of what the governor's office looked like in watching what was happening, what you were seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone remembers the first, 1 or 2 weeks after the inauguration was a very active time. President Trump was issuing, on day one, he issued like 70 executive orders. And then in the days to follow, there were more. And they were broadly sort of policy statements and intentions. So I think people were looking at them and trying to parse out what they were going to mean, but they didn't, as executive orders normally do, it wouldn't have very specific things that were going to be in there. They were more
Okay.
like, this person's going to report out in 30 days, and we're going to see and try to align our policies with our programming with our policy goals. But one of the first, I think it was a day one executive order, was called Unleashing American Energy. And American Energy, a lot of the federal funds, again, is coming from that Biden 2021, 2022 IRA and IIJA funds, which is all the infrastructure and job investment money that was coming from the feds. And this EO basically paused all of that funding on day one. And so
So January 21st.
20, it was on the 20th.
Right.
I think he went back after inauguration and signed a whole bunch of orders, and that was one of them. And then very quickly, a day or two after that, there was the OMB memo that sort of spoke a little bit more about that. And states were really in a panic because it did seem like, based on that executive order and the memo, that all funding was going to be turned off.
Okay.
And in fact, in Pennsylvania and in a lot of other states, it was temporarily turned off. States were not able to get their Medicaid payments.
And you were expecting money to come into
and those federal draws. So the state will draw money from the feds, and they'll do that sometimes multiple times a week.
Oh, okay.
Definitely once a week. It's not like it happens once every 6 months.
Right.
It's a frequent drawdown because most of these programs work where the work is done and then the state gets reimbursed by the feds.
Okay.
And so that's happening on a pretty regular basis. And so these payments were not going through. So there were a pretty stressful couple of days where we were trying to figure out what was going on. And what happened next was it's confusing, but the bottom line was there were more executive orders. There were the DEI ones, the gender ideology ones, all of which were essentially saying, we're going to take a look at programming to the extent that these programs are not aligning with our goals, which means they shouldn't be supportive of DEI. They shouldn't, there's two sexes. It shouldn't be gender ideology, or there shouldn't be this, or there shouldn't be that. Those programs are no longer going to be funded by the federal government. So those terms weren't defined. No one really knew what that meant. It sounded like it could be very harmful to Pennsylvania, but it really was unclear.
But there was still, right, it was
unknown.
Unknown.
And then then the Medicaid funds opened up, some of the really big ones that we were concerned about. And I think it was just, there was a lot of chaos. There was so much moving very quickly. It's, the federal government's a big place. And I think there were just some details that were sort of lost, and things got turned off and then they got turned back on.
Fairly
quickly, within a couple of days. We're now talking about sort of the end of January.
Okay.
And then we were still seeing, though, that there was a bunch of things, mostly this IIJA money that was still shut down.
Okay.
So that was mostly impacting our Department of DEP, PennDOT, DCNR, those types of agencies.
Oh, and you just touched on this. So the Medicaid did open up.
It did very quickly. It was only shut off for a day or two, maybe 3.
Okay.
And then 2 lawsuits were filed. The one was filed by a group of nonprofits saying that they were impacted, because what happens is this federal money comes to the states, and then the states have sub-grantees that could be nonprofits or any number of different groups of people. It could be
an organization.
Exactly.
Organization.
And so those groups were asserting their legal rights, knowing that their funds, or fearing that their funds would be cut off. So that was the first lawsuit. And then the same day, a multi-state litigation, 22 attorneys general plus the District of Columbia filed suit in Rhode Island. And the suits were basically the same, asserting that Congress had appropriated these funds, and the executive branch didn't have the right to unilaterally either change the terms or shut them down. So that happened on the 28th.
Okay.
Now I should say, and people remember this because it was in the news a lot, right before those suits got filed, and they were very quickly scheduled for TROs to put a halt to these executive orders. And that was when the administration rescinded the OMB memo.
Right. Okay.
And then the press secretary said, well, we're rescinding the memo, but we're still
But we're
freezing the
still,
funding.
right, right.
And so the TROs went forward and they ended up being granted in both of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately there were preliminary injunctions issued in both of those cases.
And what was, so, but at the time that the funding lines were frozen, because you still
Yep.
had money that you couldn't get access to, right? So can you describe what was the next step really for your office?
Yeah.
How did you come to the decision of what you decided and describe what you did?
Yeah, so we were just looking at all of our funding streams every single day because
Mhm.
again, everything was in flux and things would be shut off and then slowly they would get turned on.
Mhm.
So we were in a position where, our position was we want to make sure Pennsylvanians are protected. But we also viewed filing a lawsuit as really a last resort situation. We wanted to see if we could get things
Okay.
moving again without that.
Okay.
And there was about $2 billion worth of funds that were not, it was originally more than that. It was close to 5 billion.
Okay.
And we engaged with the Republican congressional delegation, Senator McCormick, and said, these are the funding lines that are shut down. We think they're supposed to be open. There are these two TROs that have been ordered by the judge. These funds are not supposed to be frozen. And that worked to some degree.
Okay.
So over the 2 weeks that we were working on that, we got a whole bunch of spigots turned back on. And the 5 billion kind of went down to 2 billion, but then it kind of stayed at 2 billion. And so that was when we decided to file the lawsuit.
What made you decide not to wait to see if more would get open? Just curious.
Well, we had made all the outreach that we could
Yeah.
make. My understanding was folks were trying
Yeah.
to get it turned back on. We got some action in the beginning and then it just kind of went quiet.
So that was a
So
sign
that was a judgment call
and
that,
a sign.
yeah, that
would-
we didn't think anything more was
Yeah.
going to happen.
Yeah.
And we just also had to keep in mind the bigger picture, which was, although we were very relieved that these sources were being turned back on, they were probably being turned back on because there were TROs in place.
Right.
And so we were concerned about making sure that Pennsylvania was protected in the long term.
Exactly.
We
Okay.
didn't know whether, and we don't know whether at the end of that litigation, it would only protect the 22
Where the
states.
litigation was.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think it's a practical matter that would be difficult, but that was not a risk that we wanted to take with such important things.
And I think it goes without saying, but we were not one of the 22 states.
We were
But I
not one of the
just-
22 states.
Right.
Those lawsuits are actually brought by the attorneys general,
Mhm.
and they're a group of Democratic attorneys general, and we are one of 3 states that have different political parties for the governor and the AG. So even if our AG wanted to join that, I don't think they would have welcomed.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, just
Okay.
usually those are groups that work by political party and
Sure.
they'll align and do work together, multi-state litigation together. So we requested a delegation from the Attorney General to represent the governor
Mm-hmm.
and our agencies that were impacted
Mhm.
by the funding screen, and he granted that. And so we filed the lawsuit on behalf of the governor, but also of the Department of Environmental Protection, DCNR, DCED, PennDOT. I think those were the main ones.
And the current state of the litigation before we wrap up.
Yeah, so the current state of the litigation is, well, interestingly,
Yeah.
interestingly, after we filed it, that gave us an avenue to start to communicate with the Department of Justice.
Ah,
So
okay.
once the suit was filed, we started speaking to them every day saying, we would like to be treated the same way as these
Mhm.
other states. These are the 12 funding lines that are not on.
Mm-hmm.
We would like them turned on. And over the course of 2 weeks, every single one of them got turned on. So that was great. Now, as a result of that, we couldn't file a TRO
Oh,
or
that's
a
right,
PI
they were
because
turned on.
they were turned on.
Okay.
So we just have the suit
I still
filed.
say successful. Thank you for
So
protecting the
yeah,
citizens
that's
of
great news.
Pennsylvania.
And we're really just following behind these other 2
Got
bigger
it.
lawsuits. And ultimately, they'll be judged on the merits as to whether or
Mm.
not the president had the authority.
So what
to
is
do
the
this.
next? I guess maybe we'll wrap up over here. But what is the next step? You started talking about that. We will wait to see what happens. But what are you doing is there anything that you need to be doing in the meantime? Or loaded question, but
I mean, so now we're sort of in a different phase
Mm.
because, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room are seeing, so now, like bit by
probably
bit,
feeling the same way too.
we're getting lots of reach outs, individual agencies from different federal agencies
Okay.
saying, we're canceling this contract. We're canceling this grant.
Okay.
Or we want you to certify that you are in compliance with all of these executive orders. You know, which is challenging because an executive order is not law and it doesn't change the law. And those executive orders are going to be challenged and ultimately determined by a judge about what is the law.
Mm-hmm.
And so those certifications are sort of asking these agencies, and lots of nonprofits are being asked to certify. It's having them sort of get ahead of the law a little bit. So it's a difficult
So what do you
position.
do?
It's very difficult. And we're really just taking, we're trying to take a slow wait and see approach because a lot of stuff comes in every day. And it doesn't mean that there's a lot of stuff to do about it every day.
Okay.
Because not all of these things actually come to fruition.
Okay.
So we're trying to, you know, as we did with this suit, we're trying to be very careful, watchful. And our guidepost is just making sure that Pennsylvanians and our programs are protected.
Mhm.
So if there is a time where money is being taken away from Pennsylvanians that need it,
Mhm.
we're going to do something about that. But we have to wait and see how that plays out. So to give you an example, there was an announcement a few days ago that came from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that canceled a food program that we get $13 million for Pennsylvania farmers to grow fresh food that goes to food banks that feed needy children and food insecure seniors. That was shut off, canceled. So, you know, we are looking into what our
What to do
avenues,
next?
what to
Okay.
do about that. And we're starting to talk about that. And we talked to our other states because other states are getting these things in drips and drabs. There's lots of things like that.
Mm.
All of the FEMA money is being reviewed. They haven't said they're canceling it. They're just saying they're on a 30-day review for everything. So there's just lots of things. There's SNAP audits going on right now. There's today they said to a bunch of different states that they were ending all COVID funding. So the COVID funds are still flowing. They are going to wrap up in the next year or two, but these are funds that are obligated already.
Mhm.
So that, you know, that was today.
Contractually set. That happened today.
That happened today in about 10 different
Well,
states.
and I just realized with all these audits and all these the time spent in having to monitor all this and then respond to all this is taking you away from your day job, which is everything else that you were doing before January 20th. So I would just like to say, if I may, on behalf of the residents of Pennsylvania, thank you for all that you are doing for us, truly. And thank you to the governor for all that the governor, your office, and all of his leaders are doing to protect the residents of Pennsylvania. And thank you again for coming here today and taking the time to just give us exposure on how the process works and what it looks like. And good luck with
Thank you.
everything.
Thank you.
All
My
right,
pleasure.
please thank Jen Selber again. If you would bear with us for one moment, we will now shift to our panel, How Federal Funding Impacts the Nonprofit Community. You already heard about that, how that funding, if the speakers and moderator would please join us up here. You've already heard about how the funding kind of, I guess it might be okay to use the word trickle down, but how the funding moves down, and now we're going to hear how it is directly impacted.
Great. So thank you for having us all here today to talk about the nonprofit community. And I just want to take a moment to thank the leaders that organized us, because there is no more important thing in this moment to meeting the moment, to having leaders who are stepping up with courage and convening and allowing an opportunity for us to connect and to exchange information, because that in and of itself provides solidarity and comfort in a very distressing time. So I want to say thank you to the leaders. Thank you, Kathy. And Jennifer, thank you so much for your leadership on the front lines. My heart and spirit is with you every day. I didn't know that I'd had a connection to you and knew you, and it's just wonderful to see that you're on the front lines. I feel like we're in good hands. So thank you for your public service. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and we've got just an absolutely phenomenal panel today. And I want to thank you, each of you, for your bravery and courageousness for talking today. I want to remind everybody that we've got members of the press here in the room, and that we also, though I think they're probably here mostly to hear from Jennifer. And I think also wanted to say that we're going to open up the forum for some Q&A from the audience. We also have 200 people on virtually joining us today. And so if at all you're ever asked to answer a question you do not feel comfortable, I'm going to leave it on a kind of a volunteer basis for you guys to respond to what you want to. And you can certainly say, just sit in silence. It's perfectly fine. So just a quick word about who I am. I'm a managing attorney at Cheshire Law Group. I head up a team, which is a law firm that exclusively serves the needs of nonprofit organizations, mostly in Pennsylvania, but certainly around the region, national and organizations that have national presence and an international work. I founded the firm almost 14 years ago after leaving big firm, big law, and knowing that I wanted to exclusively dedicate my practice to serving nonprofits and be on the front lines and have an affordable and accessible business model for them. And I'm proud to say, as a woman-owned law firm, that I head up a team of extraordinary, much better than me attorneys, a group of 9, including myself, and we're growing and I feel incredibly fulfilled to be working with organizational leaders like the ones that are sitting here in front of us today, and to be able to have the opportunity to meet this moment as a private practitioner. There's nothing more fulfilling for me in my career. So I am going to allow the speakers to introduce themselves individually, and we will start with Christina from Project Home.
Thank you so much for having us here today. Appreciate it. My name's Christina Kamar. I'm Vice President of Government and Institutional Giving for Project Home. Since 1989, Project Home has been on the front lines of addressing chronic street homelessness in the city of Philadelphia. Our co-founders, Sister Mary Scullion and Joan Dawson McConnon, started Project Home as a once-only winter refuge. We now have 24 locations across the city. 21 of those locations are permanent, supportive, and affordable housing. We also have our Hub of Hope Center in Suburban Station, a drop-in daytime center to connect our residents and potential residents with resources. We have our federally qualified health center, our Stephen Klein Wellness Center, as well as our Helen Brown Community Center and our Honickman Learning Center Comcast Technology Lab. Our home model is what we believe will solve homelessness in our lifetime. That's housing, opportunities for employment, medical care, and education. I'll just give a quick plug that I do have annual reports with me if you want to learn more about Project Home in more detail before you go. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Christina. And next up, Arun.
Hi, my name is Arun Prabhakaran. I'm sparing Morgan the
Prabhakaran.
fire on my last name.
Prabhakaran.
And I'm the president of the Urban Affairs Coalition. UAC is a 56-year-old organization born out of the civil rights movement, and it has been dedicated to building wealth in urban communities, creating chances for youth and young adults, as well as making sure that there's opportunities for nonprofits to grow and thrive in the region. So we're a fiscal sponsor to about 60 programs. We're the largest and oldest Black and Brown-led fiscal sponsor in the nation, and so happens that at this point I'm the chair of the National Network of Fiscal Sponsors, which is our trade association representing about 1,400 groups around the country. In addition to that, I was previously Chief of Staff to District Attorney Larry Krasner.
I'm Marshall Mitchell, and I'm Arun's friend. I'm the pastor of Salem Baptist Church. It was founded in 1884. It's the oldest African-American congregation in Montgomery County. I have been there for 13 years, and if anybody has ever pastored before, it's very similar to dog years. Each one represents 7 years. And since I've been there, we've expanded. When I got there, we were about 45 members in church every Sunday. We were located in Jenkintown. Now we're about 2,700 members. Still very much a traditional church. We're located in 3 locations in Montgomery County. We have some affordable housing that was built in the 1970s. And right before COVID, we bought a 10-acre campus from the Archdiocese where we house an autistic school. We house Police Athletic League of Abington, a daycare, a Phil Abundance location where we're distributing to about 6,000 families, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and then we bought another distressed church asset about 6 blocks away in Abington also, and we maintain the church that was there and have 3 others under our roof and built an official senior citizen center for the state. So we're doing a lot of stuff and MacGyvering faith and service at the same time. So.
Thank you, John.
Hi, I'm John Delaney. I'm a member of the board of Catholic Social Services. My day job is I'm the Director of Investigations for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. I like to say it's a shame we need one, but it's a good thing we have one. Prior to that, I worked in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office for a long time and had the pleasure of working with Jen Selber. And I don't think the governor could have picked somebody better to be in charge of all those 1,000 people doing good work in the Commonwealth than Jennifer Selber. Just to give you an idea of Catholic Social Services, we're the largest non-governmental provider of social services in the Commonwealth. We provide services in the 5 county areas, and we do it according to the at least four corporal works of mercy. We try to nourish the hungry and shelter the unhoused. Last year, we served 1.2 million meals. We have over 100 residential beds for people in recovery, where in those programs alone, they serve 350 meals a day. We strengthen and support at-risk children, youth, and families. Last year, we served over 1,000 youth and families in the Philadelphia area. We stabilize and enrich the lives of seniors. We currently have over 400 seniors in affordable housing, mostly in repurposed convents and rectories. And in addition to 200 seniors who are served in our day centers every day. And then finally, we empower individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have over 200 of those folks who are severely challenged, both intellectually and physically, in residential programs, 150 in a day program. And these programs to various levels are extraordinarily dependent on federal funding.
Thank you all. I mean, just incredible scope of services and reach for our communities. I don't know how we could carry on without your contributions. So given that this is a panel that's talking about how the federal funding freeze and federal funding in general impacts the nonprofit community, I wanted to just start with the question of what's keeping each of you up at night. John, do you want to take the lead on this one? And then we'll come down the road toward me.
I would answer it in 3 ways, Morgan. One is primarily, what about those we serve? Jen did a good job of describing. Normally, the federal budget is an every 2-year stress event. Now it's an every 2-hour stress event. And so worrying about what will we do for these folks if this money goes away, or if it gets cut, or we're the recipient of a grant that gets redlined. How do we do that? Can we mobilize other resources to continue to serve them in the way that we currently do? Second, concerned about those with whom we serve. We have an immigration legal office that provides free immigration services to people. There was a meeting on Friday where they were all in tears because not only are they worried about their jobs, they're worried about the denigration of the valuable work that they do and being called by names that are not very helpful to them to try and do the incredible things that they do. And then finally, in addition to those whom we serve and those with whom we serve, I'm worried about the people with whom we lead. Because this, over the last several months, has had a cascading effect. It's not just the every day you hear something new. That's on top of something else, on top of something else, and on top of something else. And when you realize that the federal government makes up 40% of Pennsylvania's budget, the state's not going to be able to make that up. The counties are not going to make that up. I don't know if the philanthropic community and our donors are going to be able to make that up, but we're going to have to find new ways to do things if these things that are threatened on the horizon actually come to pass.
I guess the thing that keeps me up at night is a fear of the future.
Yeah.
There really is so much caprice right now as things are being executed and thought about. And if the last 2 or 3 months have brutalized you, gosh, this is just an administrative approach. Imagine when the authorizing committees and the appropriators in the House and Senate in DC really start to take their kind of blunted access to the federal budget. So the future frightens me. I have very little confidence that the federal courts are going to be on the side of where I would hope they would be. The other thing that keeps me up at night is a lot of the people who I'm supposed to go off to war with are scared.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a group you want to go off and fight with. And so many people are looking through the rearview mirror of remembrance, and they think the future is going to be the way it was. And I think it's very dangerous for them to do that. So the caprice of the times, the fear of other people who've got to have a plan, and then so many people are just tremendously immobilized. They're paralyzed.
Yeah. I think I read a headline today about even federal court budgets being changed and frozen and putting the squeeze on judges that aren't making decisions that appease. Arun.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I feel like we're seeing a part of our values being eroded, and things that we hold dear and we built up over centuries under attack. So that to me is very, very provoking of concern, right? And I'll say, because I'm more of a grease monkey in the nonprofit sector, so to say, we run a big organization where there's lots of programs that all have different kind of activities that are going on. You know, one program's an after school program, another is a homeless shelter, another is a 24-hour drug and alcohol treatment program. And so one of the things that we really see is that this there's a characterization of the nonprofit sector as somehow waste, fraud, and abuse. When reality is that the nonprofit sector is usually the underfunded sector, making sure that you know, basic wherewithal of things that are supposed to be happening in society is happening, right? We don't want hunger, homelessness, criminal issues to go off the rails in this country. And by disconnecting the notion of how resources contribute to those problems is a very dangerous way to approach a very logical problem that we've understood for a very long time. I think that the long-term impacts of this will be generational. If you look at the civil rights movement, many of the remediations for impacts that came either during or after took almost 30 years in resolution. So we should not perceive this as being a today, here, gone tomorrow problem. This is a longitudinal change in public policy and the discourse on lots of different levels, even down to the rule of law and fundamentals that we all thought and maybe believed were immutable to a certain degree. And then last, I want to say that we forget about the economic impact, and John was referring to this. So, you know, the nonprofit sector is, you know, in Philadelphia, significant. Philadelphia banked in the 90s on a meds and ed strategy. In fact, we're standing in a building that is defined as the Jefferson Health Building, right? So what we know is across the Commonwealth, and you know, it's 15% of people work in nonprofits. It's used heavily in the Philadelphia region. 30% of people work for nonprofits, meds, eds, or other social service organizations. So if you think about our GDP, right? Like that's if you're thinking about the economy or any of those things, Philadelphia doesn't have the biggest contribution to the GDP, but we have one, and 30% of that is coming from nonprofit activity. So we will have a negative impact on the economy, on revenues, on wage taxes, everything you can think of as a cascading reaction to a sudden precipitous loss of a significant amount of money. And I'll be brief here and just say, most may not know that about $2.8 billion of the Philadelphia budget, which comprises a little bit less than half, it's like between 40 and 50%, is, to John's previous point and Jen's point, federally funded. So it rolls down either directly from the feds, from the state to the feds, or directly to the city to be distributed in the grant making procedure that Jen had described. And so that is going to have a very difficult impact on Philadelphia, given our poverty as a region, given our dependencies on food insecurity programs, health programs, education programs, and other well-being. So many of the funders in this region are taking this very seriously. Philanthropy is taking it very seriously. But the big challenge is the biggest purse is the government. And foundations, all added up together, can't really do everything that needs to be done. They can't even do a fraction of it. So really, this is a way of life question in many ways that we haven't really fully apprehended. And I think we have to start wrestling with it like that.
And just as a reminder, I think we're on day 66 of a 180-day plan from the Heritage Foundation that's really driving this and sees this as a unique opportunity, their words, with a presidential transition. So I do think it is about, I think we're in the midst of a culture war, and I think nonprofits are driving it and nonprofits are defending it. It's fascinating. Christina.
I've spent the last 10 years working in higher ed, and the last year I've been with Project Home. And in the last year, I've witnessed the transformative power of recovery, of people making the transition from sleeping outside on the street into having a key to their own home. So I think for me, what keeps me awake at night is the lack of humanness in a lot of these discussions and decisions that are being made. I think that we're talking about cutting services potentially and freezing services to help people make a better life for themselves. And I think that's very concerning. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of noise, there's so much information to try to consume. And I think that at Project Home, we're really driven by the belief that none of us are home until all of us are home. And that collective work that we all have together really helps us meet our mission. And I think that as we're having these discussions and we know that investments in services save money, it helps the economy, but it's also people that we're talking about. It's people who are living on the street and are now living safely and comfortably in a bed with a community of supporters built around them. So I think just kind of centering it back to the human component in all of this is kind of what keeps me up at night. It feels very far removed from that as we're having these discussions and hearing all the news every day.
It's such a good core reminder, I think, that if someone else's civil rights are taken advantage of or abused, or right, it does affect all of us. That we can't stand and say, "Oh, that's happening. It won't happen to me." It's just a fundamental core belief in our country and in the rule of law. And we fought, as Arun says, for decades, generations for where we are today. And in terms of progress, progressive aside, just progress about honoring humanity and connection among us and safety and the sense of safety. So going back down the line, if I can start with you again, Christina, how are you and Project Learn facing and managing the challenges of today's tomorrow?
Well, we read a lot of news every day. Our executive team and our senior management teams are in constant communication. We're also kind of committed to this wait and see approach right now of making, thoughtful decisions and not reacting too quickly and digesting all the information. We're certainly leaning on our partners, our board members, experts in the area to help guide our decision making. We want to remain first and foremost committed to the constituents that we serve. So that is always top of mind. All of our staff members work in buildings with residents. I work down the hall from the laundry room at our Christopher J. Seward residence. So I think that's some of the things that we're doing. We're, making sure that we're up to date on all our current reports that are due. We don't want to be held up if we need an environmental review done, or if there's other reports that need to be made in our various systems. We want to make sure that were there a funding freeze that would impact us directly right away, that it's not because of a report that we didn't submit or an environmental review that we need approval from the city to move our grant agreement forward. We're also leaning on partners in the community, whether that's, organizations like PANO or other organizations where we're convening as a group together to work collectively. Like we have some members of our team heading to DC later today for a Capitol Hill Day with other members of I forget the acronym, but I'll remember it in a second. And just working together, kind of like that strength in numbers mindset. Those are some things that we're doing right now as we every day get news of what's happening. I think we're staying publicly and externally communication wise, really showing our impact and making sure that regularly we're communicating with the community, with our donors, with the general public about the importance of the work of Project Home, why it matters to the community, how many people we serve. We have more than 1,000 units of permanent supportive housing and growing. We're continuing to build and strengthen relationships with our elected officials, just to make sure that we're continuing to show the impact of what we do, and also, convening and working with other partners in the community.
Thank you, Christina. Arun,
Okay, I'm gonna.
you want me to
answer
repeat
this-
the question?
No, I remember it. Now, I'm gonna answer this in two different ways. First, just at a high level, this is slightly humorous. On the morning I'm an early riser. Those who know me know that. On that morning, my wife had jostled me in the bed and I had missed my alarm because I was awake when it went off and I thought I had snoozed it. So I woke up at 8:45 in the morning and my phone was absolutely exploding. This is on the 28th that Jen referenced because the federal funding freeze had been announced to be going into effect at 5 o'clock. Now, I'll tell you something that this may seem irrelevant, but Philadelphians, those of you who are Philadelphians, may experience this. They don't know people in other places because we tend to be insular as a community. And so I didn't grow up in Philadelphia. And I'm also on some national work. So I started calling everybody I could think of around the country to see how they were responding to this. I probably called 60 to 65 people from 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night that night. But we were able to get, as an organization and as a network, really close to this, to the point where when the injunction was announced, I heard about it on the phone from a board member of the National Coalition of Nonprofits, which was the one who made the case and got the TRO. And so I heard about it, and then it showed up as breaking on CNN 45 seconds later. So within a matter of less than a business day, we were able to get close to where this action was. But the problem is, to your point, people are feeling afraid, and maybe this cognitive dissonance where we're not able to understand the what, the why, and the how, and the amount of information is really putting people into a place of kind of action paralysis, right? They don't know what to do. They don't understand it. They don't understand why people are doing it. They don't understand the scope and scale of what's being done. They don't understand that trillions of dollars are going to have colossal human impact by being lost. The second thing, so we started working on rapid response right away. I want to just call out a few people. See Peter Gonzalez, those of you may know him, formerly of the Welcoming Centers, consultant working with philanthropy, and a good friend of ours, Kate Houston, as well, putting in a regional response to working with this. So I invite Jen and others who are interested in working with philanthropy and nonprofit leaders to come talk with us, because we're here to support and to be a bulwark against all of this hitting the ground as fast as possible. The second thing is we're business people, right? This is like a gigantic exposure of unprecedented order around compliance and risk, right? So we have people scanning every website, contracts, documents for language that could be concerning, and not concerning from the sense of we're not going to change our values, but we might have, in a moment of less vigilance, written something in a contract that brings undue attention to something that needs no attention at all and is presumed by the previous statements, right? So just going through and being like, right? And then second, in terms of audit and compliance functions, the way that the TRO from Rhode Island rolled down is allows people to enact their own normal authority to do procedurally what they may not be now allowed to do under the OMB. It's a longer procedural process rather than a bomb drop, right? So those organizations that are impacted by those things have to start really getting right and tight on making sure there's no compliance slips, making sure that their immigration, their I-9 paperwork is all correct and there isn't any gaps in that. And at the same time, stand up for the values that we all believe in. So limit exposure, stand strong, right? And then the third thing is we need community, right? So one of the best things that the nonprofit sector has done has been rallying community people together, leaders, CEOs of organizations, to come together and break the silence and the isolation they're experiencing right now and get ready for action. Because the reality is, this is the largest nonpartisan issue I might have ever seen in my life. Right? This is not about Republican or Democrat. This is about what Americans are going to experience in America, in the home of and birthplace of liberty under an American administration. So we have to stand for those values regardless of what those consequences are. And so in that, we've been forming partnerships. We convened over 300 nonprofit leaders on a regular basis.
Nice.
We're convening philanthropy. Philanthropy is convening amongst its own circles, working with folks like Lindsay right here, who I haven't met, but I saw her name tag. Yeah. From the repositioning fund, and really trying to put together an intellectual and kind of business package to try to resolve these issues. But you can't solve these on a one-off basis. This has got to be a collective effort.
Yeah, this leadership right now is so essential, and it's so great to hear these stories from the front lines. I just also want to heighten awareness about state legislation and state movements that are being made that are very much in the spirit of what's going on at the federal level, and encourage lawyers not to take the eyes off of what's going on there and have nonprofits laser focused in on what's coming. It's a different power dynamic in terms of political parties, certainly, but it's only by narrow margins. The elections are a constant. And it's just state and local matters a hell of a lot. And we're seeing that in states that can hold their ground and say things publicly, that we're following state law. We're following federal law, right? Of course, getting retaliation against, for that, but at least they have solid legal ground to stand on. So looking on all fronts and staying mindful of that. All right, Reverend.
I'm enjoying this panel because as a Black Baptist minister, I'm speaking less than everybody else.
Yeah.
This is enchanting to me, Bishop Arun.
Well, before I take my seat.
Yeah, there you are. We are spending a lot of time in Montgomery County. A lot of things happen for Black people at Salem Baptist Church, not exclusively, but it is looked to as a leader in Montgomery County, even though probably 85% of the people in programs involved on the campus are non-Black, non-Baptist. And so one of the things that I've recognized is we can actually exploit in a positive way the opportunity to serve populations that would not necessarily be expected on that campus. John, you used the number. I started thinking about it, taking inventory of all our programs the other day. We serve 1,000 kids on our campus, even though in our church we might only have 200 kids who are active in our program. So we're serving 800 of Abington's kids, Upper Moreland's kids, Upper Dublin's kids. And so it's a different kind of twist. And as I stepped back, because institutions are resource starved, and you pray they're not imagination starved. And I stepped back and said, what's my real congregation look like? My congregation has 1,000 kids in it. It's Catholic Youth Organization football. It's Police Athletic League kids. It's kids at our autistic school. And so we thought about how do we take what we're doing right now, do more of it, do it better, look for funding sources which are not on the chopping block, and then move with alacrity and dispatch to get it done really fast and to finish projects that we've got in progress. And so one of the things we're doing is, if you look around the area where we are, there's nowhere to get a reasonable cup of coffee. And so you know what we're starting? We're building out 3,000 square feet in a convent, a former convent, a cafe and a coffee shop, right? So that has a psychological impact upon Black people because, you can take government contracts away, but you can't take our ability to shop with one another, do business with one another, and say to hell with you while we drink expensive coffee that we bought from ourselves. Drinking coffee, eating food that you have prepared, and having young Black kids on this side of the cash register, where most of the customers are not Black, has a psychological impact. And what I've got to do, I don't have the luxury of waiting for funding cycles.
Yeah.
I've got to reprogram people for the times in which they live now and prepare them for the future, which could be even more egregious and more hostile. And so I spend a lot of time on the psychological services side of getting our people ready and saying to somebody, you know what, we didn't have this coffee shop a year ago. We weren't buying from ourselves. We weren't selling to ourselves. We're doing it now. And everybody jokes around with me by saying, what's next? And that what next attitude is good for me, because that takes care of the paralysis that gets built in when
Yeah.
people lose politically.
It's
And
empowerment.
It is
Yeah,
completely.
and engagement at community level and
and-
just,
and-
taking
and-
control of what you can have
and
control over.
the civil rightsification of the Black community has driven some sectors and parts of the Black community into a tin cup mentality.
Yeah.
Which is very far afield from where African Americans were in the shadows of this building in 1776, because those great founding fathers oftentimes bought services from Black people right in the shadows of this building.
Yep.
And so part, I think, of the culpability that the civil rights industry has to bear is that it did not look at economic rights on an ownership side as carefully as it should have.
Yeah.
And I think the greater danger of that is the progressive politics can also weaken the sense of self-empowerment of Black people, because so much of its tendency is toward who's funding what and what's the government doing.
Right. It shifts the power balance and it's empowering. I think I really like that you brought that point up because it allows me to share with you that you are not alone in that effort. Just this week, I've had correspondence with 2 other organizations that are starting to be more entrepreneurial in nature with a sideline, and they've called me to say, hey, how do we comply with UBIT concerns? That's unrelated business income tax, or can we even do this? And let's talk through it and plan accordingly. So that's wonderful. I'm seeing that as a trend and in a responsible response to the moment and meeting the moment appropriately, I think. Thank you for that, Reverend Mitchell. All right, John.
Ditto. I just had 3 quick points. One, you can steal this line. We don't serve those people because they're Salem Baptists. We serve them because we're Salem Baptists.
Amen.
Which is what we say to people about Catholic social services. We don't serve our brothers and sisters that need help because they're Catholic. We do it because we're Catholic. So what we're doing in the face of today's challenges, 3 things. We're continuing to learn. We're trying to stay abreast of what's going on, what the current reality is, and what will happen, to be prepared for what will happen, even if it doesn't. Second, teaching. If I could get every Washington policymaker in a room, I would have him or her repeat the sentence: a budget is a moral document. A budget is a moral document. And so teaching legislators and policymakers the effects of what they put in a budget, what they take out of a budget, how they eliminate things that we've depended on for so long to serve our needy brothers and sisters has real life implications. And the third thing that we do is pray. And every day at Mass, a section of the gospel is read. The gospel today included the line, nothing is impossible for God.
Thank you, John.
Amen.
I'm going to do a quick time check. And yeah, thank you. I'm going to do a quick time check. Okay, awesome. So we're going to cut to the quick, and I'm just going to ask my last question. And then, well, maybe I'll ask if you guys can answer these pretty succinctly. I think we could do both of these because we have just in a word or 2, if you can. What are the takeaways that you've gleaned, or the most important tips that you've taken away from this moment? Everything you've been experiencing, hearing, and what are those tips or takeaways for meeting this moment? Just in a word or 2. That I know that's super unfair. And we'll start with you, John, because you're a lawyer.
Stay calm and recommit to the mission.
Yeah.
Move tactically and swiftly.
I would say, just remember, civics are important.
Yeah.
I would say do your research to make sure that what you're hearing, going back to the, is it law? Is it an EO?
Do your homework.
Yes, do your
Yeah.
research and ask for help from your partners when you need it.
Be curious. All right, we're going to do another speed round, starting with Christina. What are you most grateful for in a word or 2?
I'm most grateful for, and I said this earlier, but the transformative impact of seeing somebody in recovery. I think people can persevere. I think people are resilient. And I think that those stories and bearing witness to people overcome crazy, wild obstacles gives me hope for the future.
Perseverance and resilience. Great. Thank you. Arun,
that.
2 words. Christina, that was not 2 words, by the way.
Just need a word count.
It's fine. It's all good.
Well, I'm very grateful for the Philadelphia community. We have
Arun, 2 words. I love you. You know I do, but 2 words, please.
Philadelphia community.
That's good. Reverend.
Yeah. I'm Black. I've seen this show before. Get to the next season.
All right. John.
Thanks to everybody who's working and concerned about this.
Okay. And if anybody has any 2-word questions from the audience you'd like to fire away, I will help moderate. All right, we got one in the back. Please stand up, state your name, and ask your question clearly.
Hi, my name is Ann Gemmel. Happy to be here. Thank you for hosting the Moment series. My question is merger and acquisition. Is this an opportunity for nonprofits to do some really hard consolidation questions? I have thought for a long time, being a long Philadelphian, that there's a lot of redundancy in a lot of our nonprofits.
Great question. I'm going to answer that in 2 words. Yes, ma'am. Any others from the audience? Shout out to you.
I have another 2-word question if no one else can get.
Bring it on. It's either yours or mine. So, yeah.
I mean, I love what our religious leaders on the right side of the panel said in general today. And I think, without getting too political, the Democrats need to get the memo from voices like yours. And I'm looking at the House list and looking at who's up in 2026, and I'm wondering, is anybody looking to nudge their leaders into candidacy to seize the moment? Because
Okay, so we got a long-winded question here in the back, but much appreciated because it's so topical. The question, I'm going to repeat it and then I'll give another answer. The question is, are we seeing more organizations, I'm sorry, I'm going to paraphrase. Are we seeing other organizations in this moment, meeting the moment, doing more advocacy, but crossing the line into political campaign activity, perhaps by forming 501c4s? And the answer is, yes, ma'am. I think that's a wrap. I want to appreciate and give gratitude to our amazing panel and the leaders that put this panel together. I cannot take credit for that. Thank you guys for being so brave.
Okay, first of all, I am touched as the next panel comes up. Perspectives from the philanthropic community. Karen Lyman will be moderating. I am beyond touched, moved, and inspired by this panel. So thank you so much, Karen. Please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of this important conversation today. I'm Karen Lyman. I'm an advisor at Bernstein Private Wealth Management. And just as Arun said earlier, 30% of folks in Philadelphia work in nonprofits. I was one of those people. I joined Bernstein as an advisor after 25 years in the nonprofit sector in both management and fundraising. I'm very sensitive to the situation that we're finding a lot of nonprofits in right now. And I'm also very sensitive to our philanthropic community, who, to borrow the words from Morgan, is very brave today in showing up when there are a lot of questions and not enough answers. So thank you all for being here today. Government funding used to be our most stable and secure source of funding, and that has been ripped away. So as we heard from the panel before, there is a dramatic impact on nonprofits and the service that they can provide in their community and to their constituents. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, ask our panelists to introduce themselves and their organizations in their responses. And I just want to ask you guys first, is what you heard in that earlier panel consistent with what you're hearing? Yes?
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Lindsay, you
Yes,
first.
yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
to borrow some words from Morgan. So, hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay Kiefsky. I'm a partner at Sea Change Capital Partners, which is a nonprofit focused on helping other nonprofits facing complex organizational and financial challenges. And in that capacity, I lead our collaboration-related grant-making program, which focuses explicitly on nonprofit mergers and acquisitions and other forms of collaborative transactions. And so my role here in Philadelphia is that I serve as director of the Nonprofit Repositioning Fund, which is the first completely funder-driven collaborative to support this in a local community, right? And so currently we have 13 of the 13 philanthropic funders around our table. We've been in existence for just over 10 years, and it feels so clearly that this is the moment we've been preparing for all 10 of those years, right? We provide a safe space, a confidential space for organizations to brainstorm and consider different options for their business model, collaborative options. We provide education to the nonprofit ecosystem, so funders, nonprofits, the technical assistance community on how to navigate these considerations. We provide referrals and a network of folks who have been through this, either from the nonprofit side, so board or staff leadership, or the funder side, or the technical assistance side. And then probably most importantly, to the nonprofit audiences listening in, we provide grants to help nonprofits explore or plan these transactions. And in short, yes, ma'am, right? We have seen quite a bit of the beginning pieces of what our nonprofit panelists described as what some of the most salient sticking points for the sector are anticipated to be over the next few years. We have heard from nonprofits who have been asked to certify their compliance with some of the executive orders coming down from the administration and are having to make really difficult decisions around funding sources and whether or not to pursue different types of funding as a result of those executive orders and that compliance ask. But in short, we have been seeing an uptick in this activity for a few years already in this region. I think it took a little bit of time to see the full effects of the COVID pandemic interruptions come to light for nonprofit organizations. But 2023 and 2024 were our two busiest years in history. And we are definitely on track to outpace that this year. So yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Mike?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Kellerman. I'm Interim Executive Director currently with Philanthropy Network Greater Philadelphia. Philanthropy Network's been around for going on 4 decades now and exists really to serve its membership, which is made up of a wide diversity of philanthropies from smaller to larger, different types of philanthropies from the 5-county region. And we exist mainly to bring people together to take collective action, to form partnerships and collaborations, information sharing, training, learning fundamentals of practice across the sector. But personally and professionally, I had a chance to work with the Pew Charitable Trusts more than a decade ago. Those 2 philanthropic experiences, that and this one, sort of sandwiched in between that, I had a chance to lead several nonprofits here in the Philadelphia region through times of transition, all of them in the sort of behavioral health, mental health, public health space, all of them more than 80% funded by Medicaid. And so I think I can say, yes, ma'am, certainly felt the impact. And I think the funding freezes, what's in the executive actions, and that goes deeper than that for philanthropy as well, sent a shockwave certainly throughout philanthropy as to how to even approach the conversation about being prepared to fill whatever gaps are coming or underway, or for some communities already there. And ultimately, what role can philanthropy play, acknowledging that it cannot be the solution to as widespread a situation as we may be facing. So yeah, I also wanted to say I had an opportunity to work with Repositioning Fund on a big project that was a tremendous experience. I'm also a huge fan of the Repositioning Fund and look forward to spending more time with Lindsay in the future.
Sarah?
I'm Sarah Martinez-Helfman. I'm the president of the Samuel S. Fells Fund here in Philadelphia. Everybody in this room knows Sam Fells, even if you don't think you do. If you've been touched by the Fells School of Government, Committee of 70, oh my gosh, the Ethical Society, the Pennsylvania Economy League, Victim Witness Associations, the Philadelphia Orchestra, the planetarium at the Franklin Institute. If you have anything to do with child labor laws, with unemployment insurance, with 5-day work weeks, you know Sam Fells and you know his legacy. And so this is a 90-year-old private foundation, and we're proud to be part of that legacy. Our focus now is on systems change, social justice, social, racial, economic justice. We fund movement building organizations in our city, a lot of grassroots organizations. Some of them have government funding, many of them don't. And I would say, I just want to acknowledge, I'm not only proud to be here among the Bar Association members, but I want to give a shout out to public interest lawyers here and on screen. I'm really proud to be part of a city that has a reputation for having among the top ecosystems for public interest law. And if you are a public interest lawyer, or if you have spent a good chunk of your time doing pro bono work, I'd love to see your hand up. And I'd love for all of us to look around and say, support these people. We need each other. We really need each other. To the question about, yes, ma'am, who's at risk? The targeted attacks, right? Intersecting with administrative actions, funding freezes, all of it. It's an attack on institutions, on systems, and on nonprofits, on the judiciary. I mean, we are all in this. We are all feeling the effects. We are all assessing risk. We are all figuring out how to prepare ourselves for addressing those risks in our sectors. This idea of moving everyone to the private sector, while I applaud the comment earlier about entrepreneurship, the private sector, we have a nonprofit sector because so many people are left out of the spoils of our private sector and capitalism. And we need to figure out how to come together and stand up and support the people who are counting on us, all of our residents and citizens. So yeah, I mean, I think everybody's feeling it, and everybody has to look at, who am I? What are my values? How do I stand up in this moment? Who's beside me? And I guess when I was sitting in the back of the room with the first panel, listening to that question about what keeps you up at night, I found myself flipping that question to what gets you up in the morning. Mm-hmm. And what gets me up in the morning is being able to live with a sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. And for all of us who live with that sense of purpose, or who want to have it and maybe haven't felt it before, this is our time to shine. There are lots of reasons to get up in the morning. I'm really honored to be in this room with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we absolutely feel the same at Bernstein. I'm privileged that I get to work with nonprofits, foundations, charitable families, and individuals to not only maximize their resources, but to align it with their mission and their values. And I think that is such an important focal area, right? That we must proceed from our core values, from our core purpose. And in light of that, I'd love to know, and Sarah, you can Michael, actually, let's start with you. What are you doing within your own organizations? And how are you, because you serve such a broad membership, how are you convening everyone in discussion? We heard from Arun that this takes collective effort. What are you doing, and what's top of mind for your membership?
Sure. Well, I'm going to refer back to the previous panel, because just yesterday, Morgan Cheshire and her associate led us and our members who attended in a session about how to lead with courage through times of uncertainty, how to find courage and define courage in these times. And last night I found myself going back and looking at the ACLU's description of Project 2025, which is a really good resource if you want to do a quick deep dive. I hadn't read it for a couple of weeks, and it's funny how just a couple of days changes the perspective on anything these days. And so looking at that, regardless of political affiliation, it's pretty clear and pragmatic in that plan what the pillars of the industry that are being dismantled or attempting to be dismantled are, and that is the agencies at the federal level that, like HHS and others, the nonprofit sector, which is listed as the activist nonprofit sector, and philanthropy. And when you think about those three pillars, I was thinking about how it's clear that there's not going to be a very clear path for federal agencies and those within them to fight back and or push back against some of these changes. And that comes back down to the nonprofit sector and philanthropy. And these are very different sectors in nature. I'm really, really excited to see how much organization and mobilization is happening. I think that was touched on in the last panel a bit, but at the nonprofit level, whether it's through PANO or the LaSalle Center or United Way or many, many different formal and informal groups that are coming together to start to sort of harness their collective voice and work together. I think that's extremely important to see happening. And it's not going to be enough anytime soon to necessarily fight back. And so that comes down to the question about philanthropy. One thing I'll say that gives me a little bit of hope is I was looking at some independent sector data on trust in institutions. Those of you that have spent time with me lately might be bored to hear this, but when you look across a polarized nation, there's not a lot of trust in institutions. Most of them that you can think of fall well below 50% in trust, but there are a couple of institutions that rise above the 50% mark. And the two of them that stood out to me are small businesses and nonprofit organizations, right? There's extraordinary hope in that. If you think about the array of communities that are touched by one of those two pillar institutions on a daily basis, if speaking with a unified voice, I think people across our nation will soon be hearing stories, or should soon be hearing stories, about what the value of those investments are that are being cut. And I have a lot of hope with that. But I don't want to gloss over the philanthropy side of that, because philanthropy is part of the 35% and under club when it comes to trust, right? And I think there's a lot that can be said about misunderstanding of industries or whatnot, but I wanted to make two quick points about philanthropy that I've experienced as coming back into the philanthropic sector. One is that traditionally, when you look across the philanthropy network's membership, yes, we have some large institutional funders that have big brands and big budgets and are able to do big things when it comes to messaging, marketing, and others. But our traditional member is a small foundation, maybe a few staff members, maybe one, maybe a part-time staff member or a consultant who's actually working with the family or the board to make their grant making happen. These are small businesses in their operations, and it's not traditional in these organizations that there's a marketing arm or a communications arm or even a self-perception that you can use your voice in advocacy or at a large level. And that's where I'm feeling hope that organizations like ours exist to be able to amplify and bring people together to have that. But I think the consequence of that is in answering the question how to meet the moment. I think it's human nature that in the first several weeks of the actions that came forward, there was a paralysis. That word was used in the previous panel, right? Some organizations, some philanthropies didn't have the luxury of paralysis, right? Day one, I'm thinking of the trans community, I'm thinking of the refugee immigrant services communities, didn't have any time to sit back and be paralyzed, right? I heard from members who were cutting checks for organizations to make payroll in the first week or two of the administration, et cetera. But back to that paralysis, I think the concern that philanthropy isn't a big enough institution in our region and across the country to replace government funding at the levels that these cuts are being suggested or enacted as we speak. I think that leads to a lack of understanding as to how to act. And I think that's a thing that's important to understand, that philanthropies are talking on a daily basis about how to go into action in the urgency, but how do you also protect your resources for what might deepen as the needs expand and the cuts expand over time? Organizations that exist to fund in perpetuity, how do you make sure you protect that such that you don't wake up a year or two from now having responded in the moment and then put yourself in a position where the communities that you support have less resources coming to them at the time when that need might actually be expanding? So I think it comes back to an industry that typically wasn't challenged with having that large voice, but is uniquely positioned in our country to be able to speak with a common voice with a little bit less risk than some of the other pillars that are being affected right now. And I think those are the conversations that are happening within organizations on a daily basis. And I'll end by saying, one of the things that was heartening is a few weeks ago, the William Penn Foundation Board of Directors put out a pretty wide-spanning statement as to their solidarity with their values and the values of those that they support through their grant making. And that was a very powerful statement, not just because it represented one of the largest philanthropies using its voice in that way, but also because what we started hearing within the network is, and then started collecting, are what other organizations, large and small, corporate, private, public, are doing to stand in solidarity with their grantees and with their the communities that they support. And one by one, we were hearing a lot of different sort of ideas come forward, and those have been used, and members have been leaning on each other to be able to speak that voice. Because I think what's important to also acknowledge is that we have been hearing through the network and through our members that some nonprofits feel alone or feel they're not hearing the voice of their supporters. And I think breaking through, as Morgan encouraged us yesterday, to be more courageous in taking a stand with grantees, as well as to be able to follow that up over time with what action that might translate into. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about what tools or what specific actions are underway and imagined that philanthropy is imagining for stepping in to sort of stem the crisis.
Lindsay, we've heard, of course, and we all know, we all commonly understand that philanthropy is not going to fill the buckets, right, of this federal funding freeze. And you're in a unique position to be at an organization that is addressing other solutions for organizations. And I'm wondering, what are you hearing from the organizations that you're working with, and what's top of mind for them?
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of the organizations that we're working with, Michael, you called out a couple of those sectors that are particularly vulnerable and have been since even before the new administration took effect on January 20th, but have been under attack since. So we have a lot of grantee partners who work in those fields, right? So I think first and foremost, we are checking back in with our grantee partners, making sure that we can be a support to them as they continue to navigate processes that already are sort of vulnerable and ask a lot of the organizations involved in them. So that is one piece that's extremely important, right? But beyond that, I would say that we are opening the doors wider and building a longer table, right? The repositioning fund does not exist in a vacuum, right? It is a tool that nonprofits can use mergers, acquisitions, collaboration is a tool that nonprofits can use to increase their effectiveness, their resiliency, their sustainability, their efficiency, but is by no means the only tool, right? And so we're making sure that we are getting into more active, more proactive conversation with the folks that are addressing other areas of resiliency for this sector, right? And so that we can continue to think about a broad continuum of services available to Philadelphia's nonprofits to help navigate this difficult moment and others that are, potentially still to come. So that said, we're thinking about the ways that we can be helpful beyond the scope of our own grants. A lot of educational programming coming down the pike in partnership with all sorts of folks like Michael and some of our partners that are here today, and then beyond. We are tightening up our sort of own processes in-house to make sure that we can move as quickly, as nimbly as possible with 13 folks around the table. Sometimes it's hard to get 3 folks together, but bringing 13 people or 13 different organizations on this journey. There are ways that we have been working on making sure that we can respond as quickly as we will need to as a group. And then on top of that, we are always in conversation with folks about learning more about this work. It's not a good time to learn about the work that the Repositioning Fund resources when you need that, right? So we're trying to get to folks earlier, reach out into the community more broadly so that when or if people do need the services that we can provide, they know who to call, they know how to call. The Repositioning Fund is and always has been an open access resource for all nonprofits in Philadelphia. So we do not have any sort of size or sector requirements. It is open to nonprofits from the Philadelphia Orchestra all the way down to, let's talk, fully grassroots, volunteer run, maybe no recurring annual budget organizations. And so we're doubling down and reiterating that this is a resource for everyone. And even though it's not the only tool, once again, that folks will be using to address some of the uncertainty that we're seeing widespread, just making sure that it is in conversation and present, so that if and as people need us, they sort of know how to find us.
Lindsay, we're so grateful to have the repositioning fund here in Philadelphia.
Me
to
too. Me too.
service
As a
our nonprofit
as a
community.
lifelong nonprofit employee, me
Yeah.
too.
Can I say something? Just in support of repositioning fund, the one thing that I experienced in working with the fund that was so important, but wasn't often said early in the process, is the confidentiality of the process, right? That these can be very sensitive conversations. If a couple of board members are talking about something that would be shocking to the other board members to even consider, but it might make sense, or there might be an opportunity here that we want to explore. The repositioning fund does that really well inside of a vacuum that allows that conversation to happen. And so I just wanted to put that out there. And legal environment confidentiality is really an important part of what they do.
Absolutely.
Sarah, I want to amplify what FELS Fund offers to its grantees beyond the check, which I think is a terrific model that other foundations might want to borrow from. Can you share a bit more?
Sure. Part of our value statement, we say that FELS is that we acknowledge we're both a product of and a response to injustice. So we come to this with quite a lot of humility. We don't believe that philanthropy is all about benevolence and generosity. Sam Fells was allowed to amass a lot of money. That's inequitable tax policy. Like, there's a lot of ways we get to philanthropy, so I won't go into that. But that acknowledgement is important because we have to be mindful every day of leaning into the justice and leaning into the values. And that is a conscious decision that we make as we do our work and as we engage with our communities. So I'm not an attorney, but I learned a phrase from one. You might correct me if I pronounce this wrong, but firmus manio. Does anyone know what that means? It means we are committed. We are committed at FELS to staying the course. And we set our course a long time ago, so we're not pivoting right now, right? We learned how to move money quickly. Everybody in philanthropy learned that they could do that during COVID, right? We're sticking with that. We learned that nonprofits, because, well, heck, I used to run a nonprofit. So decades ago, nonprofit executive directors were saying, please give us multi-year general support so we can pivot when the unexpected comes, so we can plan ahead, so we can actually learn from each other and not just try to get this transaction of a check every year from you, right? This has been common knowledge for a really long time. It's not always how philanthropy operates. So at FELS, we really made an effort to put down the moat, take the crocodiles out, be very accessible to folks, and to listen and start with what we're hearing from grantee partners in the communities, because the people most affected know what they need, right? And so we don't sit in a dark room and decide, you know, what we care most about and then decide to move money to it. We listen and we take direction from our communities. And yet we're a relatively small foundation, right? So we can't do everything we're asked to do. So we have to figure out what we're saying yes to and what we're saying no to. We have continued with the general support, the multi-year. We've continued to add capacity supports, which are more important than ever right now, because especially for grassroots nonprofits who don't have the capacity and the staff, compliance issues, you know, financial issues, HR issues, like all this stuff, legal, it's going to be more and more important. And we need the people in this room to help support that. We have opportunities to convene because we don't just fund individual organizations. We're trying to strengthen an ecosystem, right? So you need to bring people together and see what emerges from those conversations and those relationships, right? We put the nonprofit communities in really difficult circumstances because they always have to compete for funding, right? So how do they build relationships with each other when they're always forced to be like this? So if you fund multi-year and bring people together, there is a whiff of a chance that actually something meaningful can happen among groups. We share information with our peer funders. In the last few years, we've raised about $7 million, not through FELS, but directly for grantee partners in the community that we've been funding, that we've already vetted. We do the homework, we get the information to our funders and peers, and it creates some streams of revenue that might not have been there because a lot of these organizations don't have the capacity to go through the application hoops that are required of some of our peers. We have continued to support pooled funds. So there's a new one now for a pooled fund for immigrant and refugee, 3 refugee serving agencies in the area. Catholic Services is among them, right? NSC and HIAS. A pooled fund so that they can help move money into the community where it's needed. With refugee resettlement, you can't just say, well, we've frozen some funds, so let's just pare it down. You know, you have expertise in those organizations on torture. You have expertise in multiple languages, multiple cultures. You can't just pare it down and build it back up, right? This is a dismantling of a system. And we are moving investment dollars, right? The other side, you know, we spend about 5 to 6% in grants. What's the other side doing? We're moving a lot of it into private investments that are also aligned with mission and values. How do you align all your resources in that way? So that's something we've been looking at since 2017. I will pause there.
Thank you. Sarah, I love that you amplified the power of collective impact, right? I think that's why we're all here today, is what can we do? How can we help? Now at Bernstein, I know some of our foundation clients have been considering other kinds of responsive strategies to meet this moment. Some are considering advancing their grant timelines, right, to distribute funds earlier. Others we're helping to model what it would look like if they took a larger draw in their endowment, right, to increase their grant support at this time, particularly to those that have a high dependence on government grants and contracts. What do you think of these strategies? And are there other strategies that you're hearing from the funding community that we should be considering? Yes, Liz, go ahead.
You would like me to start? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I think, I think folks are doing what they can do with what is at their disposal, right? Which is sort of the practical piece of it, which is great. I think 2 things come to mind. So these strategies are excellent, and it's wonderful to see those responses, but a couple of additional thoughts. So the first is the importance of coming together, right? Arun, you brought it up as the importance of community in moments like these. And so I think a coordinated response from the philanthropic community, more communication among different philanthropic bodies and funders. And so that's why, Michael, your work and your team's work at Philanthropy Network is so crucial in this moment. Being able to share what's already being done and think of ways that we can build beyond that together. And so the Repositioning Fund, one of our mandates is to help nonprofits cut down on, duplication of efforts and things like that. And I think that that's something we try to model as a group of funders and will be doubling down on through this period and then beyond. But then the other piece that I would think about in terms of what folks should be considering is just thinking about, from the philanthropic community, thinking about grantee partners' needs very holistically in this moment, right? What dollars that might have been allocated in a foundation's mind towards programs for a certain nonprofit may need to be reallocated to other organizational priorities that may be emerging very quickly, right? And so there may not be a ton of advance notice. So I think being able to be nimble and both, proactive in finding out what the needs of the grantee partners of the nonprofit community are, and then considering those with a bit more of an open mind is not going to be a bad idea through this. So one of the ways that we're thinking about that, right, in terms of expanding and growing our services is that it's always been something that the repositioning fund is willing to consider helping nonprofits wind down or dissolve responsibly. That said, we haven't had much demand for that, line of service through the fund historically. And so as we are moving, and considering, we hope, right, that won't be a significant need of the nonprofit community, through these years, but it, is likely, and it is on the table. And so we are making sure that we have, skilled up in some of the areas that nonprofits will need to navigate those considerations responsibly, gaining expertise in the house, and, convening folks who have expertise in legal, M&A, HR, public communications, things like that, so that we can, once a nonprofit realizes that may be on the table and they call the repositioning fund, we aren't giving them a list of here's 15 other places that you now need to call. Let us help you work through this in a systematic way. And so I'm sorry, thinking just more holistically about the needs of our grantees and what the flip side of some of our work is going to be key in this moment.
Absolutely. Two things come to mind from what Lindsay and Sarah were saying. One is I'm amazed at the capacity that people are showing professionally to help one another and to be partners right now. People are underwater in all sorts of ways. And yet I've had no trouble getting people on the phone at Council on Foundations, at PANO, at National Council of Nonprofits, like across the nation, across the region. I feel like organizations that may have a couple of years ago felt like they were in competition with one another are truly joining arms, and that's really helping with information flow. I'm sure we all feel overwhelmed by information, but very early on I felt like a settling into a place where if that's happening at the Urban Institute or that's happening at the National Council, those resources should be shared widely through your portals and not duplicated. And I think we're learning maybe over time how to be less duplicative, but that gives I think is a really an indication of some of the power of the networks that are already in place, but maybe not as weren't as until recently aware of how deeply connected they are to one another, and we all are to one another. So I'm looking forward to some of the solutions that come out of those conversations. But a couple of the tools that came to mind, I mean, Sarah's conversation about how Fells approaches grant making is not necessarily shared by every philanthropy in terms of the historic practice of giving grants. I'm sure any nonprofit experiences when you apply for 5 different foundation grants that you're applying to 5 different processes and these type of things. But I think there's an opportunity for an accelerant of some of those concepts. This concept of really trusting the community to bring forward the investments that are most important according to interests of a foundation is something that right now a lot more conversations are being had in boardrooms about how we might move away from some of our strategic plans and more toward opening up our endowments to unrestricted giving, to capacity building grants, to multi-year grants, these type of things. And I think the pooled fund that Sarah indicated is really, I think, the beginning of a conversation as the true impacts of changes come forward of activity that'll happen pretty quickly. That came together very quickly, and is already, my understanding, being deployed. And I'm also understanding they're still taking contributions as well. So should put that out there for those that are listening. My mind comes to mission-aligned investing, right? The traditional foundation spends 5%, say, let's just use that for an easy number, of their endowment and grant making every single year. But what about the other 95%, and what tools are there to unlock how that can be used and or put into the community? So, bridge loans, loan guarantees, debt guarantees, equity and other investments, other ways that those are unlocked. And that can be as simple as a foundation deciding to allocate a significantly higher percentage in a given year based on their performance. These are all tools that I think are being discussed pretty significantly. And again, back to that idea of an accelerant. At the network, we have a couple of intensive programs focused on mission-aligned investing, impact investing. It changes every couple of years. But what we've learned from those cohorts, of which Fells was one part of the first cohort, is that the ship of state turns slowly at organizations, right? There may be barriers at the leadership level, at the board level, at the investment advisory level. There may be multiple barriers to really rethinking how to put your endowment into use in different ways. But I believe this moment is an accelerant potentially because those tools will be needed in really stretching the impact of philanthropy over time. And so some of those, the sort of unintended consequences of this nasty, chaotic energy happening all around us might be an accelerant of some of the goals that in other situations would take a lot more time to put into action. I think that's true for M&A activity as well, that there may be more proactive conversations happening now that are easier to be had than maybe just even 6 months ago when those, cultural identity and other barriers were more firmly in place.
I'll add maybe two things. I mean, you just mentioned bridge loans. FELS has been making bridge loans. We have a revolving loan fund for our grantee partners. Because if there's a federal funding freeze, or if donors don't pay till the holidays at the end of the year, there are a lot of reasons for even without this freeze, there are a lot of reasons that there are cash flow issues in nonprofits. And so we put out bridge loans should that be needed. It's a $1 million fund that's revolving, so there's not enough to cover everything. And I think even without the funding freezes, we need to figure out the contracting, right? Yeah. I mean, if I'm getting my roof repaired, I pay a half down up front, and then I pay the rest. I pay the balance when it's repaired. But for nonprofits, they need to front the money, hire the staff, do the work. If they don't fill out some paperwork right, they go to the bottom of the pile. It might take in my last role as an executive director of a nonprofit, it would take 18 months for us to get paid after fronting the money. We have to figure this out. The city is working on it. They've made some progress. We have not yet figured this out. This is an ongoing issue that puts undue stress and strain on executive directors of nonprofits. And I'll just say that one thing I didn't mention that we're continuing to do is we have been investing in professional development dollars and wellness for people in nonprofits. Yes. We do not fund widgets. We fund people who help people, right? And if we want continuity, we need to take care of our people. And what we found back in, I think 2018, when we made some additional grants for executive directors who were burnt out, clearly burnt out, but doing good work, right? And said, come back in a year and tell us what you did with it. Each one of those people put it into the program and didn't spend it on themselves. And so even though we make these multi-year general support grants without the handcuffs, we do designate additional wellness and professional development dollars so that it will get used for that purpose and so that we have some sustainability in a sector that is on the front lines of enormous pain and attack right now.
Thank you. You've all raised some really important strategies for everyone's consideration. I'm going to borrow Morgan's lightning round here with my final question and just ask here, we have a live audience here in the room and online. What should this audience do to meet this moment? Sarah, you want to start?
Well, if it depends who is in the audience and what your skill set is, but assuming it's primarily attorneys, we need you now, right? We need you not just in the immigrant and refugee space, though we need you in the immigrant and refugee space. We need you in all the spaces, right? Because right now, nonprofits are not staffed up and do not have the expertise to take care of protecting themselves. We're all looking at our risk. We're all looking to mitigate risk, but we're also looking to power ourselves up and fortify ourselves to do the work, right? So lawyers are needed with all different expertise on financial, on just every aspect of governance of nonprofits to make sure those nonprofits are ready to go and can continue to focus on their mission. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Michael, a bit more abbreviated, please.
Can I just steal from Arun and say the Philadelphia community? The power has always been in our system with the people. It's in our communities. Might not feel like we're as close to that as we've been before, but I firmly believe that that's where the solutions are evident, and anything you can do to push philanthropy to be reminded of that on a daily basis, it will help move mountains.
Lindsay.
Yeah, I would echo what both of my fellow panelists said. Offer your time, offer your talent. Litigation is one of our most important and best tools in this moment. And Sarah, you're right. Nonprofits do not have the expertise in-house on the whole to fight these battles on our own. And so, thinking about our community as a network of resources and not being shy to reach out with those resources to anyone who may need them, and being generous with your own resources in return when someone reaches out to you.
Thank you. And let's remember that you are all gatekeepers to others who have the capacity to support. So let's remember that as well. I'm going to just offer my biggest thanks to our wonderful panel here and to all of you for being here today. Thank you so much.
Okay, as we wrap up, I'm gonna, in a moment, turn it over to the chair of our Board of Governors, Vic Patel. But before we do, I just want to share something because based on both of these panels and my conversation with Jen, I am really moved to share with this in-person and virtual group that I actually had an opportunity to, thanks to the Philadelphia Bar Association, to go on a civil rights journey this past weekend. And we traveled from Montgomery to Selma to Birmingham. And when we were in Selma, we met with a woman who was 75 years old, and she was 15 in 1965 on March 7th on Bloody Sunday. And in the audience, after she shared her story of her civil rights journey, Bloody Sunday, and then watching the adults, they didn't have the kids travel, but watching the adults travel from Selma to Montgomery for civil rights and the right to vote, right? The 60-year anniversary of the Voting Rights Act this year. The audience member said, what can we do today as we see what's happening in our country? And she said one thing. She said, convene. She said, go to the town halls, listen to each other, support each other. And as I'm just moved to say thank you to each of the speakers. Thank you to Jen. Thank you to the audience, virtually and in the room, because you are meeting the moment by convening and having the conversation, learning and teaching each other and moving that into action. So with that, Vic Patel, will you join us, please?
Well, thank you all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Vic Patel. I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Board of Governors this year. And once again, I'd like to thank Kathy, I'd like to thank Jen, all of our moderators and panelists. Thank you to the Bar Association staff for all the support putting this together and everyone who helped organize this event. So as we heard earlier today, a budget is a moral document, right? A budget should express the values of the community. And we look at the funding that we've been discussing today. We heard, right, that this funding makes sure that Philadelphians have access to food, access to medical care, and access to basic necessities. This funding is fundamental for making sure that we can continue to represent the communities that we serve and face the challenges to come. Now, the challenges we are facing are myriad, so we will continue in the months to come to be a convener, to speak about the issues that are facing all of us today, which I guess gets me to our next event. I'm going to highlight that our next event, it's going to be focus on LGBTQ plus rights. We'll be having it on April 29th, so mark your calendars. This time it'll be in the morning, but watch your emails, watch our website for an announcement with some more details. But I'd like to thank all of you for being here either in person or online. And I'd like to also invite all of you to stay, please, and join the conversation. We have some light refreshments right outside. So once again, thank you all for being here and engaging in this incredibly important discussion today. Also for the speakers, don't run away because we're going to do a picture.